Here, we develop shapers of the world, innovators, visionaries, and effective leaders. This is where we transform you. A leading university founded by a leader, established through the ideals of former President Jose P. Laurel, succeeded by the principles of Dr. Sotero H. Laurel. A university proud of its long and rich tradition of academic excellence.
Here in LPU, we don't only get a chance to learn by book. Through the interactive activities provided by the administration, we get to apply learning to real-life problems through research, internship, and cultural exchange programs.
I choose LPU because of the greatness of its facilities. We have actual hotels and as well as simulated hotels located in our own campus. We also have Culinary Institute where we could attain real-world skills.
We have advanced facilities such as mass communication studio, recording studio, and NAC laboratories. Most especially in my course, I really enjoyed it because we are learning while using modern technologies. We are learning using advanced facilities.
LPU カビテの整備はとても整っていて、スタッフの皆さんはとても親切です。
The activities that I enjoy most here in LPU is doing extension services, going to different communities and teaching kids or students, young students, the proper dental hygiene. And that made me realize that LPU doesn't only develop us academically, but it also teaches us to become good people as well.
In LPU prepare us mentally, emotionally, and physically for the career world. And also, I chose LPU because I was impressed by its performance in the national licensure exams.
Choose LPU.
Choose LPU.
Choose LPU.
Choose LPU. You will never go wrong.
We will start the program in a few minutes.
Pleasant afternoon to everyone. This program is brought to you by College of Arts and Sciences and the United CAS Students Organization, Foreign Service Club, United Communicators, League of United Psychology Students, Lyceum Pre-Service Teachers Club, and of course, your host organization for episode 4 of the 5-webinar series, LPU Legal Studies Society. We would like to remind our participants to follow these rules during our webinar. First, the webinar will be recorded for reference on discussions and arguments. The following information will be processed during the webinar, such as the name, profile photo, text, audio, and video data. The sharing of link to uninvited guests is prohibited, and please make sure to keep your mics off unless during an open forum, and we encourage you to open your camera. Make sure to accomplish the evaluation form for attendance. Okay, so welcome to all Caesians. Before we begin, let us please settle down as we ask for our guidance of our Lord for today's program, followed by the national anthem. Let us bow our heads and place ourselves in the presence of the Lord.
I heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. But you don't really care for music, do ya? Well, it goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, minor fall and major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Well, your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof, her beauty in the moonlight overthrew you. She tied you to her kitchen chair, she broke your throat and she cut your hair, and from your lips she drew the hallelujah, 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 baby, I've been here before. I've seen this room and I've walked this floor. You know, I used to live alone before I knew ya, and I've seen your flag on the marble arch. And love is not a victory march, it's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah, hallelujah. Was a time when you let me know what's really going on below, but now you never show that to me, do ya? But remember when I moved in you and the holy dove was moving too, and every breath we drew was hallelujah, 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 hallelujah,
Good afternoon once again. How are you, Casians? Can you send some heart reacts to show the love you have for your college? By the way, I am China Tamayo, Vice President Intern of LPU Legal Studies Society, and I will be your host for today. To all of our professors who are here with us, Mr. Reginald Gonzalez and Ms. Raiza Corpus. To our guest speakers, Ms. Ranica Lane Meralpis and Attorney Aliakbar Jumrani. And to all Casians, good afternoon and welcome to our webinar entitled We Are All Equal, Gender Empowerment and Gender-Based Sexual Harassment. To formally open our program, by giving us the opening remarks for this morning, let us listen to the welcoming words of Mr. Reginald Gonzalez, Advisor of United Communicators.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ms. Raisa, the Program Chair of Foreign Service and Social Sciences. In behalf of Attorney Janice Christine Ramos Almeda, I'll be giving you a short opening remarks regarding our webinar series for this afternoon. Good afternoon again, Casians, Lyceans, and thank you for being with us today. And we are very grateful that we have a very prestige epistemic speaker, which is, of course, Attorney Jumrani. In behalf of Attorney, we are grateful that you are here, Attorney, today. So regarding the topic that is about gender empowerment, I always remember Emma Watson as he states that there are no two opposing gender, which we always have the idea to be equal or in equilibrium, which is one spectrum. So remember that there are things that women can, men cannot, and men cannot, women can. Sa buhay na may pagkakapantay-pantay, lahat tayo ay may karapatan. So maraming salamat sa araw na ito at nawa ay marami kayong matutunan sa ating webinar series because our epistemic speaker will share to you the most important matter regarding gender-based sexual harassment. Again, good afternoon and thank you everyone.
Thank you for that wonderful and inspiring message, Ms. Raisa Corpus. Okay, so just a quick reminder before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat box. And I will make sure to bring them up after the presentation. But don't worry, you may also ask your questions to our speaker directly as we will have time for our Q&A at the end of the talk. To introduce our first speaker, let me call our secretary, Ms. Catherine Ray F. Pexon.
Our first guest speaker is an advocate for feminism and arts. She is a volunteer for a feminist publication called Gantala Press, a writer and artist for the Concerned Artists of the Philippines, and the director for literary arts, writer, artist for the independent art group Astrolika. Let us all welcome to the spotlight Ranica Lane Meralpis. Let's give a round of virtual applause.
So,
Hello po. Excuse me po, Ms. Meralpis. We are unable to hear your end po.
Okay na. Okay na.
Hello po, can you test it
Okay
again?
na. Wait, sige. Hello?
Yes, working na
Okay
po.
na.
Okay.
Okay. So, ulitin natin. um, So yeah, earlier I was talking about the term herstory that I got from a show that I like, and I just want to share since we're talking about women and history. So yeah, herstory. Don't credit me for that. I got that somewhere else. Anyways, yeah, bago ako magsimula ng talk, I just wanna share kung ano yung parang preview of the things that I'm going to talk about today. So yeah, um, we are going to talk about women in pre-colonial Philippines, colonization of the woman's body, revolutionaries, suffragists, and guerrillas, women comrades, women's political participation, and fighting for pro-women legislation, reproductive health rights, violence against women and children, the anti-rape law, embracing intersectionality, and wins for the women's movement and legislative wins for women. So to start, we are going to talk about women in pre-colonial Philippines. Siguro naman familiar kayo with the Babaylands. We learned that in history years ago. So, the Babaylan was a major representation of the status accorded to women in a balangay or barangay. The Babaylan was mostly concerned with culture, religion, medicine, and other theoretical knowledge that is crucial to the conduct of pre-colonial Philippine society. Actually, I'm not sure if alam nyo to, hindi lang mga babae yung pwede maging babaylan during the pre-colonial Philippines. Gay men and effeminate men can also be babaylans, which is very interesting. And despite to popular belief, the babaylan was not subservient to the datu, who was considered the wealthiest, the strongest, the wisest, and often the bravest member of the clan. Instead, the Datu and the Babaylan worked together on important social activities. Being the spiritual leader, the Babaylan was in charge of rituals, including those of agricultural significance. Though her knowledge in astronomy, she is determined that the right time to clear or the land, yung parang siya yung nagpe-predict, like astrology we have today, kung kailan ba is the right time to plant crops, kung is this a lucky time to do this stuff, yun. That's what they do. She also studied and took charge of medicine, developing her knowledge and passing this on. Kaya para silang babaylans can be considered as a proto-scientist of the time. And if you think about it, predominantly most religions around the world, even in history, it is very male dominated, which is parang, wow, it's so good for the Philippines na even way back then, parang progressive na tayo kasi we let women lead religion. Kagaya ng Jewish Orthodox religions and Catholic religions, usually yung clergies nila are just exclusive for men, and usually they hold the highest seat dun sa mga those types of institutions. So now we are going to talk about the colonization of women's body. Before I start, I want to say na I'm not parang bashing yung Christianity at the time. We are talking about the history of what happened during that time, not the religion itself, but the people who are handling that religion at the time. So anyways, colonization of women's bodies. So when Spain colonized the Philippines, the Spanish friars demonized and claimed that the babaylans were endowed with powers from the black magic. So eventually that ritualistic culture of ours died when Christianity arrived in our country. And with that indoctrination, the friars did not just police the religious and spiritual beliefs of women, but also took control of their bodies and libido. When I say this, it's about their sexuality was suppressed, controlled through practices like confessions. The friars took the liberty to widen the scope of the Christian doctrine of prohibitions of adultery and labeled sexual activities as sinful, unclean, and thus must be confessed to a priest. This included masturbation, homosexuality, and foreplay in colloquial terms. If you think about it, in the colonial context, it can be very well assessed that as an issue of creating perception of consciousness on sex and women's bodies, parang mas lalo tayong naging vulnerable because of it, and the Catholic Church, in hoisting itself as the only source of morality for its subjects, transcended the public sphere and penetrated even the most private and individual aspect of the locals' lives. In such endeavor, the women's body was the one of the most vulnerable targets, especially in the context of feudal patriarchal Spanish Catholic Church. Uh, Hindi lang to sa Catholic Church lang nangyayari. Even if you read the history, madami talagang gantong cases, instances na religion was used to control and suppress the masses. But it doesn't necessarily mean that religion is bad. Yung the way they handled it lang at the time. So, oh, this is the exciting part. I really like this. So we are going to talk about the revolutionary suffragists and the guerrillas. The Contrary to popular belief that women just simply belong in the kitchen, take care of the home and the family, women's participation in affairs dominated by men, even back then, can be tracked back to the Philippine Revolution against Spain around the 1890s. And the Filipino-American War in the years that followed, Asociación Filantrópica de la Cruz Roja, also known as Juan Patriota de la Cruz, founded this important organization, which basically became like the founding group na nag-give birth to other women-dominated organizations na, na nilalaban yung karapatan ng pangbabae. So, as an important association founded in the aid of revolution, ang ginagawa nitong association na to is they collect funds for war. They treat wounded soldiers, revolutionary soldiers, and the membership of Cruz Roja was noticeably composed of prominent ilustrados at the time and the families that were attached to important men in the revolution. One of the most notable and unnoticed contribution of Filipino women at the time was in the realm of literature. They published poems in revolutionary publications like El Heraldo de la Revolución and La Independencia. When we talk about literary works at the time, we usually think about yung kina Rizal, ganun. Pero women were also there. They are also making revolutionary works. And this means that women's contribution to the revolution at the time was not only logistical but also intellectual. Women even went on and joined battles during the Filipino-American War, and they hailed from various parts of the country like Aguada Cahabagan of Laguna, Trinidad Texon of Bulacan, and Teresa Magbanwa of Iloilo. Itong next na favorite, parang prolific figure ko siya. Ito yung sa kanina, yung yung organization. So, yeah. Here's Felipa Kulula. So, in 1905, I think, hindi pala, wrong, sorry. Filipa Kalula, who was popularly known as her alias Dayang Dayang. Kalula was a female guerrilla commander who led one of the earliest guerrilla forces against the Japanese in 1942 as part of the popular armed resistance by a group called Hukbalahap or Hukbong Bayan Laban sa mga Hapon. So, at the time, this woman nag-lead siya ng isa sa mga unang nag-start ng parang like battle with the Japanese, and siya yung nag-lead nung ambush dun sa mga Japanese para ma-save niya yung mga comrades niya, which is really cool since you don't really hear about her in like history way back in elementary and high school. So kanina balikan natin yung yung Concepcion Felix de Calderon founded the first organizations which called itself feminist. Parang yung una kong mention before, parang they just helped and they were women. Ito talaga, they claimed that they're feminist. The Association of Feminista Filipina, AFF, this led to the formation of the Asociación Feminista Ilongga that was founded a year later, headed by an elite woman, Pura Villanueva Calao, and they engage in the struggle of women's rights to vote. The women's rights to suffrage was approved in a plebiscite on April 30, 1937, with the record of 90% affirmative votes. And the AFF also led to the formation of the La Protección de la Infancia Incorporated and later on Gota de Leche, which concerned itself with women and children's health based on the recognition of high maternal and infant mortality rates prevalent especially among the poor. And additional info lang about Felipa Colula. During the Second War, Filipino women were subjected to the worst war crimes of history. A number of them became comfort women and became victims, not just of rape, but of other heavier crime, like crime of sexual slavery. Amidst the rampant victimization at the time, there were women who actively participated in armed resistance against the Japanese oppressors. Among these women, kaya sabi ko kanina, is Felipa Kalula. Kulula. Kulula was a commander nga siya ng Hukbalahap, and yun nga, she led successful ambush of combined Japanese and Filipino forces, killing some 30-40 Japanese forces and 68 Filipino police and capturing their armaments. Women in guerrillas were typically labeled as Hawk Amazons by the press and post-war, which is cool. So, next slide. Women comrades, ito yung mga organizations na nabuo later on in history. So, the Malayang Kilusan ng Bagong Kababaihan Movement for Freedom by Progressive Women, or Makibaka, established in June 1969, attempted to situate women's liberation within the context of the struggle against women domination and class oppression. Katipunan ng Bagong Pilipina, Kabapa, was founded by women who had been active in Hukbalahap and subsequent peasant-based formations. Kabapa's constitution had a flavor of third world feminism in that it addressed national class and gender issues under its goals of equality, development, peace, freedom, and the happiness of children. In the 80s, two more women organizations were founded, the Kilosang Kababaihang Pilipina, or Philippine Women's Movement, or Pilipina, in 1981, and the Katipunan ng Kalayaan para sa Kababaihan, Organization of Women for Freedom, or Kalayaan, in 1983. Both these new organizations saw the need to separate the autonomous women movement with respect to the national democratic framework. So, here's something familiar, Gabriela. Matagal na siya even way before. Nag-comeback lang ulit siya the recent years. Gabriela, or generally Assembly Binding Women for Reforms, Integrity, Equality, Leadership, and Action, was founded in 1984 by women groups of various political persuasions and class composition from the politically, ideologically inclined civic associations. It was the first attempt at unifying the women's organizations around a feminist agenda, even as a political difference were recognized and yet disallowed to derail the efforts towards the building of the autonomous women movement. So, when the Marcos dictatorship ended, the subsequent restoration of democracy under Cory Aquino, civil society organization and non-traditional political parties blossomed. Political activists decided to set up non-government organizations, or as we know, NGOs, or social development agencies as an extension of their commitment to democratic, this time in the arena of the development work. At the same time, women's groups benefited from the popularity of Cory Aquino, who attracted huge amounts of foreign and local funding for development projects. So, women on political participation. So, there's always been a gender gap, even in other countries, when it comes to women as leaders. And sa atin, fortunately, may dalawa tayong naging presidenteng babae. So, yeah. Corazon Cory Aquino was installed in 1986 following the snap election orchestrated by the dictator Ferdinand Marcos Sr. Cory Aquino, the widow of the slain anti-Marcos Senator Benigno Aquino Jr., ran for presidency after a petition for her to oppose the dictator garnered 1 million signatures from Filipinas nationwide. So, isa pa, si Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, a former senator, vice president, was the daughter of the former President Diosdado Macapagal. Coincidentally, both women were swept in office through people power, and that time it was ERAP yung inano nila. So, although the women's movement made certain gains during the said presidencies, it can be argued that such happened in spite kasi it happened kasi they ousted men who were in position at the time. Although it was during Cory's presidency that spaces were opened for women's movements to grow, allow for the progressive participation of women at different levels of society, Aquino stayed on the conservative with vis-a-vis reproductive rights, and Arroyo did the same. So in the Philippine Congress, for instance, the first reproductive health bill was filed and defended in the House of Representatives by upper-class women legislators from political dynasties in the provinces such as Bella Angara Castillo, Luwalhati Antonio, Malu Acosta, along with progressive women legislators such as Loretta Ann, also known as Eta Rosales, and Ana Teresia or Risa Hontiveros of the Akbayan Party. Fast forward to the memorable 2016 elections when strong women legislators emerged as fierce leaders of the opposition against the controversial Duterte administration. Leading the charge were selected Senator and former Justice Secretary Leila de Lima, elected Senator Risa Hontiveros, elected Vice President and former Congressional Representative Lenny Robredo, and despite the low-handed assassinations and misogynistic vindictive tactics and rhetoric that characterized the governance style of the current administration through attacks of character. So now let's talk about fighting for pro-women legislation, reproductive health rights. Probably the most contentious and divisive legislative initiative in Philippine society in this decade is the Reproductive Health Bill or RH Bill, which took Congress 14 years to enact. It was such an ordeal since the church was so against it. The Catholic bishops stepped up their attacks, denouncing that the bill is anti-God, anti-family, as well as labeling the RH Bill as the so-called death legislation, referring to divorce, euthanasia, abortion, total population control, and homosexuality. Supporters of the RH Bill challenged the hegemony of the Catholic discourse by framing their arguments using diverse discourses, such as framing their arguments utilized with substantial and empirical data. Philippines women living in constant fear and insecurity over their safety. Contributing to the increased awareness of violence against women, issues where women, NGOs, and organizations that work to address various forms of gender-based violence experience families, workplaces, communities, and integrated vow issues into the advocacy through diverse strategies such as direct services, education, training, organization, networking, coalition building, and legislative lobbying. And one of the best examples of this practice is preventing domestic violence through a women-initiated community-based response is that of Bantay Banay, a family watch group in Cebu, which is pioneered by the Hawk Filipina Foundation. The Bantay Banay advanced the notion that the first responders to the domestic violence should be located in the community where such violence occurred. The program was accidental byproduct of micro enterprise initiative of Lee Hawk. Alarmed by the frequent absences of some women members and the slow loan repayment of micro enterprises, Lee Hawk investigated the reasons for such things that were happening and learned that women beneficiaries had having problems with their husbands that in turn impeded their women livelihood activities. Today, Bantay Banay is a nationally and globally renowned model of a community-based response against domestic violence. So now let's talk about anti-rape law. Among the landmark achievements of the Philippines, women's movement in the 1990s revolves around the adoption of the anti-rape law in 1997. Over the colonial era law on rape that is defined as a crime against chastity, not against a person. The definition of rape prevented the effective prosecution of rape crimes and placed undue burden to the victim. Republic Act 8353 of the Anti-Rape Law of 1997 expanded the definition of rape to degendered it and recognized the existence of marital rape. Now, a public crime, rather a crime against chastity, it expanded its coverage by recognizing acts such as insertion of any instrument into the genital or anal orifice to another person as rape by sexual assault. A companion measure to the anti-rape law is the Republic Act 8505, the Rape Victim Assistance and Protection Act, which provides for psychological, legal, medical, health assistance towards rape victims, which ensures the safety of the victims and mandates training of local police, lawyers, social workers, and the like on human rights, gender sensitivity, and legal management of rape cases. At the forefront of this legislative advocacy was a coalition of 13 women's organizations formed in 1992 and who named themselves the Sama-samang Inisyatiba ng mga kababaihan para sa pagbabago ng batas at lipunan. In 2016, Senator Risa Hontiveros filed an anti-rape bill to amend and modernize the current laws on rape, such as increasing the age of statutory rape, introducing aggravating circumstances. Example nito is yung use of video, other electronic device in the commission of the crime, the status of the offender as a person of public authority, and etc. And the repeal of forgiveness clause in the revised penal code. So now, let's talk about the Safe Spaces Act. So one of the purposes of the RA 11313 is to broaden its reach, ensuring the individual sense of personal space and public safety. Similarly, RA 787, Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995, is closely related to RA 11313, Safe Spaces Act of 2019. The Safe Spaces Act defines gender-based sexual harassments in streets, public spaces, online, workplaces, and educational training institutions. The law penalizes all forms of sexual harassment in streets and public spaces, as well as online spaces. So now we will talk about embracing intersectionality. The lesbian, bisexual, and transgender, or LBT, in the women's movement and the anti-discrimination bill. So the focus of the patriarchy rendered Filipino lesbians as an invisible, as a subsector of women's movement who were experiencing and struggling against a unique kind of oppression and discrimination. The Filipino lesbians confront multiple layers of oppression. They are struggling as women in a society that favors patriarchal structures of power, while struggling as women who do not conform to heterosexual norms and expectations. In terms of government support, both the national and local governments still lack nuanced actions to address the intersectionality of gender, class, and differentiating factors. A recent study shows that women who identify or are perceived to be lesbian, bisexual, or transgender are more exposed to violence and discrimination and suffer different kinds of cruelty committed by family members. They are also often prevented from accessing social welfare programs of the government. I don't know if you remember the case of Jennifer Laude, the transgender woman who was murdered. Many transgender women fall victim to brutal killings that many describe as hate crimes. In the recent years, women advocates have been stepping up their LGBT sisters and brothers, especially in the field of policy legislation. In 2001, after consultations and discussions with the LGBT advocates, Eta Rosa of Akbayan filed an anti-discrimination bill, or ADB, at the House of Representatives, and Senator Miriam Defensor Santiago filed a counterpart bill. So So alongside the development of gay movement, the lesbian movement started and identifying sa LGBT umbrella. In 1996, the first gay and lesbian Pride March, which later became the LGBT Pride March, was organized and celebrated. This was followed by fora and further collaborations with wider LGBT movement. The following year, the first Gay and Lesbian Leaders Conference was held, and it was seen as the first official collaboration of gays, lesbians, and where lesbian issues were discussed in the same bread of as other homosexual issues. The momentum of lesbian organizing was apparent in different areas and locales. So as for the wins of the women's movement, the report mentioned that women's studies in higher education has been recognized and institutionalized in many academic institutions and has been instrumental in providing a pool of well-equipped gender advocates who can influence and implement gender-related policies and programs of local government units and national government agencies. The formal recognition and institutionalization was further strengthened through commission through CHED as issuance of CHED Memorandum Order Number which provides for the nationwide mainstreaming of gender in all higher education institutions and private and public. So kaya parang ito what we're doing right now. We should say na this is a win for the women's movement. Before, women didn't really have the place to talk about issues like this. They were considered as gossip. Um, it was in a study. So, yun, na parang women discussing their troubles, their issues, their problems with their husband, it's just gossip. And then eventually later on, women started fighting back. So yeah, and thank you for the people who's hosting this event, since this is a win for the women's movement. So now let's talk about the legislative wins. So the legislative wins is, I will mention some na I was reading a few days ago na mga napasa for the betterment of the community and women. So here's the increases of minimum wage for domestic workers, an act giving representation to women in social security commissions, the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995 declared all forms of sexual harassment in the employment environment as well as in the education and training environment as unlawful. Party List System Act, Anti-Rape Law of 1997, which, what I mentioned earlier, broadened the definition of what rape is, and an act providing assistance and protection for rape victims, establishing for the purpose of a rape crisis centers in every province and city. Solo Parents Welfare Act of 2000 aims to develop a comprehensive program of social development and welfare services for solo parents and their children. The amended Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act, which strengthens the power of the authority to prosecute preempted acts of trafficking, eliminates the privacy clause previously enjoyed by traffickers, penalizes the confiscation of travel documents such as passport and working permits from trafficked persons. Anti-Violence Against Women and Children's Act of 2004 penalizes the commission of violence against women and children in the context of domestic violence or violence in intimate relationships. There's also the Magna Carta of Women, is a comprehensive women's rights law that seeks to eliminate the discrimination against women by recognizing, protecting, fulfilling, and promoting the rights of Filipino women, especially those in the marginalized sectors. And Responsible Parenthood and Reproductive Health Act of 2012, or the Reproductive Health Law, provides for a national policy on responsible parenthood and reproductive health. The Domestic Workers Act, or Batas Kasambahay, institutes policies for the protection of the welfare of domestic workers. And so, yeah. These are just some. Meron pang iba. Madami pa. So, before I end this, I want to leave you the quote by Maya Angelou, prolific feminist. Each time a woman stands up for herself without knowing it or possibly claiming it, she stands up for all women. So, wag kayong matakot na i-ano kayo na feminist, and feminist is not a bad term or bad word. People usually think it is, pero it's not. So, yeah. That's it. Sana may natutunan kayo. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morales, for your enlightening speech or discussion with us, Ms. Ians. I really like that there's a history, a full-on history about feminist history in the Philippines. It starts with way back in the pre-colonial times. It tackles in the baylan, mga datu, and then the effect of Christianity and the morals of Christianity on the women's rights and how it really affects today. And I really like that there's an emphasis on historical figures like Filipa Kulula and some associations like Asociación Feminista Filipina. And then it later gave rise to women's movements like Kalayan, Gabriela, and other organizations. For politics, I really like there's an acknowledgement for the female presidents and there's a rise for new female politicians, and then due to that may nagkaroon din tayo ng rights for women, and then we are able to pass laws that are pro women, such as the Reproductive Health Act, and then there's a minimum wage, the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act, the Anti-Rape Law, the Anti-Violence Act, and Magna Carta for Women and Domestic Workers Act, and many more. So once again, thank you, Ms. Morales, for your very informative and enlightening discussion. Okay, so let's move on to the next part of our event. To introduce our next speaker, may we call again our secretary, Ms. Catherine Ray Pexon.
Our second guest speaker is a graduate of AB Political Science in Western Mindanao State University and graduated from his legal education as a cum laude in Silliman University in 2003. In that same year, he passed the Philippine bar examinations. In the present day, he is a law professor at the Far Eastern University Institute of Law and the Adamson University College of Law, University of the East College of Law, and Lyceum of the Philippines University, Cavite campus. Also, he is a bar exam reviewer in civil law and a lecturer in mandatory continuing legal education. He conducts various topics, including children's rights, senior citizens, property law, impeachment, and gender equality. Additionally, he spreads his legal knowledge through his TikTok and his YouTube channel called The House of Law. Let us all welcome to the spotlight Attorney Alekbar Jumrani. Let's give a round of virtual applause.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Since I only have 10 minutes to do this lecture, so I'll just make this very quick. So first, I'd like to say thank you to the LPU Legal Studies Society, headed by Cindy Lorraine De Leon, for inviting me. Thank you to Ms. Raiza Corpus, the program chair of the, I think, Foreign Service Department, or Foreign Studies Department, for that mention in the opening remarks. And also following that speech, that lecture by Ms. Ranica Lane Meralpis, it was very comprehensive, and she could very well be the guest speaker for today. So anyway, I'd like to proceed by just okay, can I share my screen? Okay, thank you. I'd like to just proceed and then point out the important parts of my slide, so as we can proceed with the open forum at 3:30. Okay, anyway, so my intended presentation is supposed to be for gender equality and empowerment. So you all know that we seem to have a conflict with the concept of sex and gender, and with wait lang, sorry, I think you're seeing okay, there you go. All right, so you can, very easily confuse sex and gender, but when you say sex, Sex is what identifies the biological difference between men and women. It is also determined by reference to genetic and anatomical characteristics, and it is largely unchangeable because you're born with it. On the other hand, when you say gender, it's an acquired identity. It is you are identified either as masculine or feminine, male or female. Culturally or socially constructed roles ascribed to males and females. Okay, now also it can be changed because it is cultural and social, unlike in sex. Now, we have this sex gender system, and this is a system where work, roles, benefits, and rights are based either on biological differences between men and women or on perceived behaviors, conditions, or attributes. And this becomes the basis of decisions, policies, and actions when the decision is based on your sex or based on your gender identity, and the results are not always fair. So these are some of the sex specific assumptions. So these sex-specific assumptions um, are based on the physicality of the person. So women, for example, need maternity and gynecological leaves because they bear children. Women workers also require appropriate upper body coverings because they have breasts, unlike men. And also men require timely checkup and intervention against prostate cancer when they reach a certain age. Okay, meanwhile, these are the gender-based assumptions, and they are gender-based assumptions because they are what society expects of these persons or this population. No, they're not necessarily based on sex, but because of what society thinks of a particular gender, they ascribe or they relate a specific characteristic or feature to a specific gender. No, so that's why women are supposed to be physically weak, but then there's no physical study or scientific study to show that. In fact, some women are stronger than men. Like, for example, Hidilyn Diaz. I mean, she can lift hundreds of pounds, no, compared to myself. I can barely lift a gallon of water. So anyway, so to speak of gender institution, okay, I have 5 minutes. Gender constructs become part of our consciousness through different mechanisms. So for example, you have child rearing. So when it comes to child rearing, boys and girls are given different names, given different toys, etc. So even at a young age, these children have this concept or idea of what their identity should be. So when as a parent, let's say, for example, you give a son a Barbie doll, people will, like relatives, family, and friends will say, "Oh my, what are you doing? You're confusing the child." But actually, we are the ones confused, no? Because there is really no natural law or physical law to say that men or boys cannot play with Barbie dolls. So on the other hand, when it comes to formal education, we have subjects that are exclusive to boys, and we have subjects that are exclusive to girls. And of course, when it comes to religion, the leadership structures and these restrictions give biases or result in biases. No, and these are the following. So girl children should wear pink to make them feminine. Lady drivers are unreliable drivers. Boy children are okay, boy children should play with toys and guns to make them manly, and men are unfaithful. All right, so we should end gender stereotype and gender discrimination. Okay, so Miss Meral Peace earlier already mentioned some laws. I'll skip this. Okay, so these are also the legislations that she also mentioned. So I'll skip that. You also have violence against women and their children. So this is Republic 9262. But instead, I'd just like to focus on the types of violence against women and children. You have physical violence, sexual violence, psychological violence, and economic abuse. And so we have several cases filed in family courts. No? Cases under RA 9262 are filed before the family courts, and Republic 9262 apply not only in married relations, but also in intimate or dating relations. So clearly Republic 9262 has given protection not just to legally married women, but also to single women who are victims of these types of abuses. And these are the penalties. Okay, yes, penalties of violation of the VAUC. So it can involve imprisonment for a minimum period of 1 month to as long as 12 years and a fine of as little as 100,000 pesos to up to 300,000 pesos. Now, in addition, these are the remedies. We have protection orders, which can be issued while the case is pending or while or after the case is decided. And these protection orders seek to prevent or put a stop to the acts of violence. Now we have, of course, the criminal punishment, which I mentioned earlier, imprisonment and fine, or both, okay? And also civil liability, like for example, when there is a demand for support. Okay, we have the Safe Spaces Act. This was also mentioned earlier by Ms. Meral P. So I'll just focus on the different types of, or what are the three punishable acts. You have gender-based streets and public spaces sexual harassment. You have gender-based online sexual harassment and gender sexual harassment in workplaces. So the law provides for the different acts, no, the punishable acts under these types of gender-based crimes. Now, and note that this Safe Spaces Act applies not only to women but also to men, and more especially to LGBTs, because when you say safe spaces, it means you are supposed to be safe, you know, in your spaces. Now you have your private spaces, like at work, in public transportation, in public streets, and more importantly, in the cyberspace. So even a male person or a member of the LGBT can file an action under the Safe Spaces Act. So these are the covered places for gender-based streets and public spaces sexual harassment. Okay, tapos you also have these specific acts. And kasama dyan yung catcalling, slurs, derogative remarks, etc. Okay, also even the physical acts, no, are also covered, not just the verbal, but also the physical acts. Okay, for sexual harassment in the workplace, so this involves, of course, sexual assault, sexual harassment, even consent, well, not really consensual sex, but sex that are usually not covered under the usual rape law and other sexual crimes under the revised penal code. The thing with the Safe Spaces Act is that the Safe Spaces Act meant to fill the holes or the gaps in existing laws. Okay, for gender-based online sexual harassment, this would cover bullying, discrimination, hate speech, etc. So your Facebook page, your Instagram account, your TikTok account, that's supposed to be a safe space act or a safe space. So under the Safe Space Act, you can sue a bully, you can sue a racist, you can sue, say, a hater, no, who posts comments on your feed or on your wall. Okay, so these are some illustrations of online sexual harassment. You have terrorizing and intimidation. You also have unwanted sexual advances and sexist remarks. Now, these are usually, as you can see, these are taken from the internet, and these are mostly private messages. Now, the Safe Spaces Act enters the private realm. No, it's not only a law that deals with acts done in public, but also done in your privacy. So your private messages, do not delete that, do not delete them, take a screenshot if you need to, as you know, to be used as evidence in court. Okay, cyber stalking and incessant messaging, like may nanunuyo sa'yo, like kinukulit, kaya that's also a violation of the Safe Spaces Act. And of course, unauthorized recording and sharing of private videos. Now, in addition to the Safe Spaces Act, you can also sue that person for grave coercion, I mean, say blackmail.
Gising mo talaga. Bumising ka na. Sinagad ko.
May I proceed? Okay,
Yes,
thank you very much. All right, so these are the penalties of the Safe Spaces Act. All right, so here are, okay, please give me 2 minutes na lang. Here are the Supreme Court decisions on equality of men and women. So we have seen so many cases already where the Supreme Court has moved, from the traditional view of women to now the modern view of women, that women are now empowered and that women are entitled and are needing protection and support. No, so for example, you have Alanis versus Court of Appeals regarding names. No, so yun. Anyway, sige. Uh, tatagal to lecture ko pag explain ko pa. So you have Garcia versus Drilon on the constitutionality of Republic of 9262. You also have PTNT versus NLRC, which prohibits termination of employment by reason of marriage or pregnancy. So you cannot be terminated from employment if you get married. Neither can you be prevented from being hired simply because you're married or you're pregnant. Okay, and also you have City of Manila versus Prefecto Lagio. Here, the Supreme Court said that this ordinance targeting only women prostitutes was illegal because prostitution can also happen, no, with men. All right, and okay, so People versus Humawan, marital rape, no, is a crime and it's not justified by marital obligation. So a woman has no obligation to gratify the husband, no, simply because she's the wife. So a married woman can refuse sex. All right, so that's it. Thank you very much again for the opportunity. Now, I have a Facebook page. It's called Attorney Al Jumrani, and a YouTube channel. It's the House of Law. If you want to know more about the law, you can follow either, and we can, of course, communicate and interact in those two social media accounts. Thank you.
Thank you for the enlightening discussion, Attorney Jumrani. The discussion covered the basic concepts such as the sex and the gender, and sex is basically the biological biological component of a person, and then the gender is covers more of the cultural or sociological instances. And attorney also discussed the gender-based assumptions, the gender institutionalization, and gender stereotyping. There's also a minor discussion about the VAUSI and the remedies provided under VAUSI. Attorney also covered the safe spaces, also covered public spaces, online spaces, and the workplace. This does not only include the females, but also covers males and the LGBT members of society. And at last, then at the end of his discussion, he covered real life cases or Supreme Court cases that emphasizes on these rights. So once again, thank you po, attorney, and we appreciate for the lesson po.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Okay po. So here, let's go on, and we will go ahead and take some time for questions now. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions into the chat box or unmute. And Cassians, you now have the floor. Okay. Someone sent me an anonymous question po. Attorney, what's your opinion po daw regarding labeled bathrooms? Is there a law that governs it po?
Sorry, regarding
Regarding the labeled bathrooms po, is there a law that governs labeled bathrooms?
the bathrooms, the separate bathrooms.
Yes po.
Well, number one, there's no requirement, there's no law requiring separate bathrooms for all gender types. No, because again, these bathrooms are more or less private, no, private issues or private concerns, and it started with some companies doing the initiative. I think some business establishments in Cebu. I think it was in Mandaue, which started creating separate bathrooms or relabeling the bathrooms into all gender type bathrooms. Now, you see, the use of bathrooms is a very personal matter, and a bathroom is supposed to be a safe space. And so we cannot invalidate the concerns or demands of members of different gender identities now when they want separate bathrooms. Now the problem is unfortunately tainted with politics, with religion, and also morality issues. You know, instead of looking at the main issue, which is can can a person use a bathroom without being bullied, without being harassed? Now the issue becomes now a matter of suppressing one's own identity to conform to what is expected. Like, for example, some transgender women are forced to use men's bathroom because it's the more convenient thing to do than for these establishments to put up or open a separate bathroom for them. Now, instead of giving in and respecting their identity as transgender women, they are now the ones forced to comply and to conform to what society thinks of what sexes and genders are. No? So, ayun, it takes a regulation or a positive law to institutionalize that. But since it's not much of a priority, it becomes now an initiative of private establishments. And so my wish is that some establishments, if not all establishments, would also follow the lead now of some of these establishments already started by either creating a separate bathroom for the trans people, or simply taking away the labels. Now, instead of putting a label that this is a female restroom or a male restroom, just consider all restrooms as a unisex or a neutral restroom, and that each restroom should be with a cubicle instead of cubicles for women and then urinals for men. I think with those types of facilities, you are basically discriminating between people. I mean, I know of straight men who'd rather use a cubicle when using the restroom rather than the urinals. And I'm sure there are also women who don't mind. So far, wala pa naman ako nakitang babae umihi sa urinal. No? But then, if urination is if it were as simple as urinating anywhere, like dogs and cats, then we won't need restrooms. But the thing is, restrooms kasi are supposed to be safe spaces for everybody, so we have to respect that. No, you cannot force people to use this particular restroom because that's what your urinary organ is supposed to do. Like, for example, kung lalaki ka, di doon ka sa urinal. But then again, using the restroom is a personal and private act. So hindi natin pwedeng pilitin kahit ang isang straight person to use the restroom na designate natin para sa kanila. I think it's a question of choice. Now, we should all be given a choice kung saan tayo pwede mag restroom or mag CR. Yeah.
Thank you po, attorney.
Thank you for the question.
Okay po. There is another question, anonymous question po. The question states ito po. What are your thoughts regarding transgenders joining or participating in international pageants for female?
Okay. Number one, these pageants have their own rules. So we have to check what their rules are. Being that the purpose of these pageants, they are also contests and competitions. Contests and competitions have this requirement that all things or all candidates or all participants should be equal at some point. Now, so meaning, for example, in track and field, they have to meet certain physical tests or physical requirements. Also, in some physical sports, there's a certain height requirement. Maybe like in boxing, for example, there's a weight requirement. So these requirements or these guidelines are imposed by these these competition bodies to assure that at some point everyone should be equal. So the premise is that all things being equal, then let's see how they fare against each other in different categories. So, for example, in beauty pageants, you have best in gown, best in long wear, sorry, same lang, no? Best in swimsuit, best in talent, and then of course the Q&A. But then if you look at their credentials or their qualifications, they should all be equal. Okay. Now, these pageant bodies must provide for a guideline, that should be applied equally. So regarding trans women, I understand that some beauty pageants require that the candidate should be a natural born woman, meaning to say, not a woman uh, uh, by sexual reassignment. That's what they do pagka nagpa-sex change, or a woman by identity. No, so if the requirement is that all should be natural born women, then only natural born women should be allowed to participate, because that pageant body wants everyone to be equal. But if, okay, some beauty pageants would allow diversity, and that what is important is that you identify yourself as a woman, and this is more of a psychological concept, and I think even transgender women should be applied kasi hindi na physical ang basis, no? So I understand Miss Universe, I think beginning 2018, during the time of Catriona Gray in Thailand, they already allowed a transgender woman to participate. I think she was from Spain. So clearly, for the Miss Universe organization, the basis of what a woman is the psychological concept and not the physical concept. So again, it all depends on the guidelines of the body who's governing the board, because they want equality, then we have to comply with that doctrine or principle of equality.
Thank you po, Attorney.
Thank you.
Okay po. Hinihingi din po yung opinion po ni Miss Miralpis po regarding din po daw sa mga international competitions for transgenders joining beauty pageants po. Would you like to state your opinion po, Mr. Miralpis?
Sure. Actually, parehas lang din. Yung organizations that does those events, dapat mag-ano sila ng rules kung what to follow and people should comply with that. And yeah, actually same no answer ni attorney. Yan.
Sige po. Thank you po, Ms. Miralpis. Okay po. Next question po is regarding po daw sa cross-dressing po daw sa work or sa school po. So, for example po, nag-cross-dress si student or si employee po daw. Tapos, na-dismiss po daw si student for doing so. Can the student file against the school po daw or nababiolate for violating po daw the university code? Ano po daw yung may ibabaw? Yung university code or yung Philippine law po daw? Thank you po.
Okay, sige, I'll start. Okay, number one, kasi dalawa sitwasyon yun, no? Estudyante at saka empleyado. Okay, so let's start with the student. When it comes to student, the regulation is more strict because number one, students are supposed to be molded, no? And when it comes to molding the youth, the older people are presumed to know better. And well, for a time that was true, no? Pero ngayon kasi parang hindi naman lahat, no? It's not all the time that the older people know better than the youth. But the thing is, the school has guidelines. These guidelines are holistic guidelines aimed at number one, imposing order and discipline. Okay, because what kind of school would that be if students cannot follow basic order and discipline, order in terms of schedule, study, and also order in in oneself. So yun, it's been a staple, of a student life, yung uniform, yung wearing of IDs, taking exams. These are also part of your contract of education. Now, as a student who enrolls in a school, or once you are enrolled, you are bound by a contract. So under this contract, both of you have obligations to one another. The school is obliged to give instruction and education and to make sure that you are given that diploma or that certificate, attesting that you have taken the course or the education, which you can use later on to get employed, or anywhere, and then if that is the obligation of the school, it will deliver that to you, provided you also comply with your own obligation. And what's that? Number one, payment of tuition fees, submission or passing the requirements, academic requirements, and next, following the standards or guidelines. Now, these standards or guidelines, as I've said, are presumed to be intended for the betterment of the student. And what is for the betterment of the student is largely influenced by the traditions of the school. So that's why you will note that some schools are very strict because that's their tradition. If you go to a religious school, for example, their regulations are stricter than the non-sectarian schools. And pagka non-sectarian, dalawa pa yan, no? Kung private at saka public. Mas strict pa rin ang private kaysa sa public. Now, can we question these? Well, number one, these are all part of the academic freedom of the schools. It's like you are offering something different to the society. And part of that is maintaining a reputation. And if you are effective, as a school, you want to keep that reputation. So my point is, these guidelines are there for a reason. Okay, but take note that these guidelines must be reasonable. Now, regarding cross-dressing, cross-dressing violates, number one, the rules on uniform. Okay, so we have to check kung ano ang rule of uniform ng school. If the rule of uniform is you wear a uniform that identifies the school for security purposes, so that when you enter a school, you will be identified as an enrolled student, then okay. So the point there is for identity. Ibig sabihin, yung uniform na sinusuot mo is for identity. Now, pag nag-cross-dress ka ng uniform, ibig sabihin, if you are a male, you want to wear a woman's uniform, di ba nasa-serve mo rin ang purpose, which is to be identified as a student? Kasi ang susuotin mo ring uniform is yung prescribed uniform ng babae. Similarly, if a woman or if a female student wears a male student's uniform like a polo, nasa-serve pa rin yung purpose, di ba? Na suot mo yung uniform ng school para pag nandun ka sa loob, alam ng guard na estudyante ka ng school. So para sa akin, if the purpose of that uniform is security and identity of the student, then cross-dressing should be allowed. Okay? Kasi yun ang purpose ng uniform eh. Okay. Now, however, if cross-dressing becomes now, if it results in some disorder or lack of discipline, to me, that is an excuse not to allow cross-dressing. So, for example, if as a result of cross-dressing, people or the other students bully bully the cross-dresser, or halimbawa nagiging magulo na inside the classroom and outside the classroom because the environment is not ideal for cross-dressers, I would advise na wag na lang ituloy o wag na lang mag-cross-dress yung estudyante. It's not because the school is against it. It's not because the school is against you expressing yourself, but it's because this school, this environment is not safe or fit for you, and it will result in disorder and lack of discipline in the school community. And in that case, unfortunately, the the greater majority prevails over that need for expression. But in instances when you are free to express yourself, like in school activities like dance, balls, ganyan, you should be allowed to wear whatever you want. Now, because in that case, it's freedom of expression. What you wear is part of your freedom of expression. So those are the 3 points that I want to mention. Pagdating sa estudyante, pagdating sa employment naman, we have already moved from the very close-minded and traditional attitude towards what we wear in the office, no. So even in government offices, no, nagsimula talaga yung liberalization na yan sa private, like especially in the BPO. But even in government offices, ako, I've worked for 11 years in the government, and the Court of Appeals, no, a very conservative institution, and also I worked at the GSIS. Cross-dressing is almost normal na, no, and it's good that cross-dressing does not become a badge, no. Kumbaga hindi siya red letter, no. That's pinned on your chest, no. Hindi siya na ay nag-cross-dressing ka so ikaw mababang nila lang or something. Walang ganon. Instead, what you wear is immaterial, because as I see it, as I've observed it, people are respected for who they are, for what they are in the office, and not because of what they wear. So yun. Now, if there are policies that that will restrict the kind of clothing, I think balik tayo ulit doon sa sinabi ko kanina. These guidelines or these requirements may be because of some company policy, to promote the reputation of the company, to render better service, etc. So, for example, flight attendants, the males could hardly assist siguro, no, kung halimbawa naka mini skirt sila, but women can very well, of course, wear slacks, no, as flight attendants, pero yung mga lalaki hindi pwede siguro, no. So yun, yung mga ganong those rules may be because of work, no, because of the necessities of the job, but not because of personal identity. But if anyone experiences discrimination because of how they wear or how they behave, no, by reason of their gender identity, I'm not saying na tanggapin nyo na lang sitting down. Every case is different, no. So kahit na sinabi ko yung mga ganong mga prinsipyo, mga ganong batas, but every case is different. It's a case-to-case basis. So if you feel you are aggrieved by reason of what you wear, by reason of how you express yourself, bring it up, no, with the authorities. Let's say in the school, bring it up with your guidance counselor or your dean of students if you have. And then if you're aggrieved naman as an employee, you bring it up with the HR, or if you have a union, then you bring it up with your union leaders, no? Because again, every case is different. Now, it doesn't have to be that meron kang kasama, no? Kasi ang problema kasi sa atin, pag ako lang mag-isa, feeling mo, okay, hindi ko na lang to irereklamo kasi ako lang mag-isa, wala akong kasama, wala akong karamay. But no, okay, your concerns, your grievances are always valid, no? Because even if you are alone, you are not necessarily alone in this field, no, in this fight. So if you just express it, people will sympathize, people will help you. So go ahead, complain pa din, notwithstanding what I've said. Ayun, napakahaba ata ng explanation ko.
Thank you po, attorney. Napaka-detailed and really thought-provoking po kasi yung ano po, yung answers niya po. And I really agree po na it is a case-to-case basis po talaga yung mga ganito kasi.
Good.
Okay po. we would like to remind the participants, does the audience have any other questions po?
You know what? Let me just say, the Philippines has a very, very positive parang kay VP Lenny lang, COA rating si VP Lenny, di ba? Tayo naman, very positive rating in the world, ano ba tawag ng WEF ratings. Pagdating sa world equality, ayan, world equality. The Philippines is one of the most open. That is what the outsiders think, no? That is what the books say. That is what media shows, no? And it's good, but deep down inside, alam natin na there's a difference between acceptance and tolerance. Okay? Let me make the distinction. And siguro kung wala namang question, siguro I think this is the best way to cap my part in this program. We see gay people, we see members of LGBT, and then we just look at them. No, we just tolerate. Okay? Tolerate yung pag tiningnan mo lang sila and then you don't react. Dead ma lang. That's tolerance. But the thing is, not every one of us can accept, let's say, same-sex relations. Not every one of us can accept a young boy, dancing to a latest TikTok by Lizzo, no? Or kung sino mang mga girl, Blackpink, for example. Diba? Not everyone can accept that. No? Tapos, may reaction talaga na parang yuck. Gano'n. Alam mo yun? Pero, yeah, you tolerate them, but you cannot accept them. No, you cannot accept same-sex relations. Pag may nakita ka na nagko-holdingan sa dalawang lalaki, iba ka mag-react. Pero kapag may nakita ka namang nagko-cross-dress na dumaan sa kalsada or kasama mo sa jeep, okay lang, dinededma mo. Okay? Pero hindi mo lang ma-accept yung kanilang way of life. Tapos then, you can tolerate a stranger, okay, na bading or na tomboy, pero you cannot accept a family member who is, a gay man or a gay woman. So, yun yung the irony of it all. Now, while it is true that the Philippines celebrates, lagi nagse-celebrate ang Philippines that yes, we are one of the most gender tolerant society. But it's not enough that you tolerate. You must also accept. And the acceptance must begin from the person talaga, from within. And I hope one day we can have that society, we can have that family. I mean, nagsisimula talaga sa family na yan na we do not predetermine the gender of children or the gender of our siblings or even the gender of our parents. No? Because even if these parents became the reason or were the reasons why we existed, we know that it's our dad, who impregnated our mom, kaya tayo nabuo. But that's a sexual function. Pero pagdating sa gender, dapat hindi na natin ini-impose yan kahit sa mga magulang natin. Na parang halimbawa, pag trabaho ng physical sa bahay, we always look to the father. Pabukas naman ito, hindi ko mabuksan na Coke. Ayan. Well, in the first place, why are you even drinking Coke? Because Coke is not good for your health. Pero sige, sabihin natin gano'n. Okay. So, hindi mo mabuksan yung Coke. Kaya tulad lang nito, di ba? So, bibigyan mo sa lalaki. Bakit iniisip mo kasi sa tatay mo? Kasi iniisip mo kasi yung tatay mo, yung lalaki siya lang kaya magbukas. Diba? Why not try offering that your mom? Yeah. Pero most probably naman, ginagawa nyo rin yan sa mom nyo. Okay, but then, the instinct is always, ito, heavy work to, ipapagawa ko to kay dad. And also, pagdating sa budget or sa mga problema, we talk to the mom because we feel that moms have the heart. But then, by doing so, we are perpetuating this gender discrimination or gender mislabeling. So sana dumating ang time na we just act according to what we we feel kung sino nandiyan, sige, go ahead, no, without having to say, babae ka kasi so hindi mo alam to, or lalaki ka kasi so hindi mo alam to, hindi mo nararamdaman to. Because it starts in the family, and if we can have a gender fair family, we can also have a gender fair society, so that one day we will not be surprised, no, na may kapwa lalaki na naghahawakan ng kamay sa mall, or dalawang babae na magkaakubay, or let's say batang lalaki na sumasayaw nga ng lizo, 'di ba? Sa kalsada at nagti-TikTok ganyan, or babae na ano ba ginagawa ng mga lalaki sa ano, na nagmomotor, no? Nagmomotor na babae, ganyan. So, yun. Although unti-unti again, because we are tolerant. But the thing is, ask that tolerant person, tanungin mo siya, kaya mo ba na ang nanay mo biglang mag-out sa'yo at sabihin niyang tomboy pala siya? Oh, definitely he or she will say, oh, no way. Ganun yan. Or alimbawa, isang parent, tanungin mo, you're very happy looking at Vice Ganda. Pero let me ask you, will you be as happy pag yung anak mong lalaki naging bakla? Katulad ni Vice Ganda? Sasabihin, ay, wag naman sana. O, diba? Yan, yung mga ganyang linyahan, ibig sabihin, hindi pa tayo nakarating doon sa acceptance. Yan. Pero papunta na tayo sa exciting part. Baka nandito na tayo sa exciting part. Yun. So anyway, again, thank you very much ulit for inviting. Doon sa invitation ni Cindy when she invited me, sabi ko, this is perfect. I've already talked about this in many offices na. No? The last one was being to doon sa isa office at DHSUD, the Department of Housing. So yan, yung mga matatandang tao na yung mga nandun, no? You can expect these are straight people, but sama meron pa rin effect. Now, no amount of BL movies or mga gay comedies, no, will change a person's attitude, no, from tolerance to acceptance. Kailangan talaga real experiences talaga. Because yung mga napapanood, these are just entertainment, and and people who watch these movies, they still feel detached. You know, detached ka pa rin talaga sa pinapanood mo eh. But if we are to really have, a place we can call where we are all born equal, then we have to live it. No, not just say it and read it. We have to live it. Sabi nga ni Lady Gaga, we are all born this way. So ayun po, mag-evaluate na daw kayo kasi alas 4 lang. Anyway, thank you very much ulit. Sayang hindi ko narinig ang boses ni Miss Cindy. Baka di ka nagsasalita, Miss Cindy.
Closing, sir.
Closing ka. But in fairness, maganda boses ni Chai na Tamay. Siguro DJ to.
Thank you po, attorney.
Sige, anyway, I'll shut up na.
Na po. Okay po. Okay, let's proceed to the giving of certificate to the guest speakers. To award the certificate of appreciation, let us call our VP External, Ms. Corinne Jade Anbat.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to our guest speakers for today, and good afternoon to our teachers in College of Arts and Sciences. So to award your certificate of appreciation, Lyceum of the Philippines University and LPU Legal Studies Society present this certificate of appreciation to Ms. Ranica Lane Meraltis and Attorney Ali Hakbar and Jumrani in grateful recognition and appreciation for her knowledge as shared as our resource speaker during the webinar, We Are All Born Equal, Gender Empowerment and Gender-Based Sexual Harassment, given this 30th day of May 2022 via Zoom, signed by Mr. Reginald Gonzalez, the advisor of Language, Communication, and Education, and Attorney Janice Christine Ramos Almeda, the advisor of LPU Legal Studies Society and the Dean of College of Arts and Sciences. Again, thank you very much to our guest speakers.
We would like to invite everyone to open their cameras for a photo opportunity with our guest speakers.
Ready po. Wait, 1, 2, 3. Apa po?
Okay. Now, to formally close our fourth episode of CAS Students Webinar Series, let us welcome the LLSS President, Ms. Cindy Lorraine De Leon, to give us the closing remarks.
Good afternoon, Kasayans. To formally end this event, I would like to thank all the people behind this CAS webinar series, Sir Reginald Gonzalez and Ma'am Raisa Corpus, and most especially our beloved Dean and the LPU Legal Studies Society's advisor, Attorney Janice Christine Ramos Almeda. Moreover, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to our two resource speakers, Ms. Ranica Lane Meralpis and Attorney Al. We are very thankful to have you as our speakers for today. Thank you for making us realize that all of us are potential perpetuators or offenders, and we are all potential victims of discrimination and harassment. Also, thank you for enlightening us and educating us about the history and the laws concerning the gender and the gender-based sexual harassment. It has been a great jumpstart to achieve the number 5 and number 16 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, as these events pulls a step closer to building a community in which every gender deserves to have equal opportunity, privileges, and duties in all aspects of life. Lastly, I would like to thank all the attendees of this webinar. May we be reminded that a better future will be achieved when we create a safe space wherein equality and due respect is given to everyone and no one is discriminated against, especially on matters of their gender preference. Let us all be reminded, be empowered, and break gender stereotypes. That's all.
Now, let's listen to our program and let's sing together our LPU hymn. Once again, thank you to our dear guest speakers, our dearest professors, and our fellow CAS students. So that concludes our event for today. May we ask the others to turn on their cameras for the picture taking with our guest speakers once again.
Sa pa daw po. 1, 2, 3 po.
Thank you po. Okay, for those who haven't accomplished the evaluation form, you can scan the QR code or click the link in the chat box. You can send it until 10 p.m. as it will serve as your attendance. Before we end our program, we want to invite you to the next episode of our webinar series. Stay tuned to our CAS page. We also have a teaser poster and video for our alumni interview series. I'm inviting you to all watch it on the CAS Facebook page. So once again, thank you and have a nice afternoon, everyone.
Thank you po.